Welcome, everybody. Kevin Cole here, host of the Unexpected Points podcast. I'll say it like the Ohio State here as part of the introductions. I guess I could do one of those. Remember the Jamal Williams introduction during that? I guess it was for the Green Bay game in Week 18, where I don't know, a bunch of mumbo jumbo was coming out there. I'll have to implement that perhaps the next time around. Okay, so what do we have here? We have a pretty interesting week, quite honestly. Normally, this is a little bit of a lull here in the between Super Bowl week. I'm not talking about the Pro Bowl either. I'm not talking about the interesting things that'll be going on with the dodgeball competition for the Pro Bowl. Thank God I've recently been a convert to a lifelong international soccer fan, so I can watch that this weekend rather than see what's going on with the flag football version of the Pro Bowl, which who knows, maybe it'll be good. Tyler Huntley is earning some bucks out there. Props to him. No, so I'm not going to be talking about that, but we did have some pretty major news here. Just to give you a bit of a gist of what I have written out here that we could talk about. Brady retirement, not a whole lot interesting to say there, but I am going to revisit some stuff I talked about in the QB GOAT series where I went over the most statistically valuable quarterbacks of all time. And I'm probably going to revisit that this summer, putting out posts on all of that, update the methodology, all this sort of stuff. Maybe a little bit of a Rodgers update. I've already talked about that a decent amount. And again, that's just like, I'll believe it when I see it for him. Coaching hires, we have Sean Payton, we have D'Amico Ryans. We'll talk about that. Coordinators, I'm a little bit less interested in talking about that than other people. For me, it's mostly just, the shrug when it comes to these different coordinators coming in and out, what'll end up happening with those. Everyone's going to have a take on what's going to happen there. Free agency is around the corner. PFF put out a free agency piece yesterday. And of course, Twitter being what Twitter is, when I put out a snarky thing, I should never put out the snarky thing of making fun of the Geno Smith write-up in there, because in my opinion, it was far, far, far too generous in terms of the projected contract for Geno Smith and even some of the write-up around it. And, friend of the show, PFF Brad Spielberger, saw that. He kind of thought that I was, when I joked that it was written by Geno's agent, maybe thought that I was saying that he was being influenced by the agency side of thing, which is funny because, I guess I didn't even think about the fact that is a complaint about PFF. PFF does work with different agencies. So maybe there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. I don't know, but I wasn't actually even implying that for this particular thing. I just thought it was funny. I just thought he was way off. I mean, the Daniel Jones deal that he has in there too is like extremely high, maybe closer to what's possibility because of the fact that he's a younger guy. But I'll talk about some of the free agency stuff when it comes to Lamar, because I put out an article on that today. Geno, some of the other players, some of the plans for what I have next week. And then we'll get to the questions. I have a handful of questions that were submitted by paid subscribers to a post earlier this week, so those get priority, and then any additional questions that flow across here in the chat, maybe even mark Q&A in the chat if you have a question for me. And I'm going to get to that, but it's not going to be for a bit. So, don't think that I'm going to hop right on and start answering those questions. I'm going to have my monologue here for a while on the happenings in the NFL. Now, before I even get to that, too many befores here. I will say, for those of you who are listening to this on the podcast version of it, yeah, this is a premium pod, meaning at some point in this, it's gonna tailor down, it's gonna cut off a little bit here. And if you want to get the whole thing, you have to be subscribed. I am thinking about, though I have not decided, and willing to take input from anyone on this here, I am thinking about potentially making even the interview pods a premium and free version where, maybe like half of the interview is free before it trails off, and then you have to sign up premium to get the rest of it. It would still come with the same disclaimer, or I don't have a disclaimer, same offer that I have when this one trails off, is that, anyone having any sort of financial issues or anything like that, I'm more than happy to comp people a 6-month free sub if they want that. And then, 6 months from now, we can decide, do you want another free 6 months, or do we want to, drop out altogether, or do you want to, become a member? become a member here, a paid member here. I'm willing to give that to anyone. Just trying to think of the best way to figure out compensation to work, because it's not the podcast, the interviews. It doesn't take a ton of work because I wing it a lot, honestly, when it comes to questions and conversations, and I'm talking to people who I know. But still, you got to set it up. You got to spend the time doing it. You got to edit it. You got to post it onto YouTube. You got to do all that stuff. So I may transition a bit there especially if I'm going to start doing more podcasting and more interviewing there. I may transition to a free/paid model there. With everything still being, at least for the time being, no matter what, everything will still be for free on YouTube, because I kind of want to pump up the YouTube numbers a little bit too. Because if I can pump that up, I think that actually might be a better way of finding more of an audience, is by distributing that. A lot of people find things via YouTube versus, shares are just not a big thing for podcasts. Click through are just not a big thing for podcasts. It's amazing. Like when I put out a podcast that gets shared a lot, I'm trying to think of one. Ted Knutson, who I talked to a few weeks back, the founder of StatsBomb. That one got shared a bunch. I got a bunch of retweets. It's just the amount of people who click through to a podcast episode, knowing the time commitment that's going to come from that, knowing you have to have like an audio feed as opposed to just glancing through an article. I mean, it's okay, but it's just not that great. It's nothing compared to the articles that I post on Twitter, which often, depending upon the subject matter, can get, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 click-throughs that you'll see in the Twitter analytics. It's just nothing close to that when it comes to podcasting. So anyway, to try to pump up the YouTube channel too. So if you're watching this on YouTube currently, thank you. If you're not, go over to YouTube, find Unexpected Points there. I'll post it in the Substack write up and subscribe to that there. And then you'll at least make sure you're always going to be getting 100% of the episode, whether you have a free subscription or a paid subscription to the newsletter. All right, let's get into what is happening this week. Brady retirement. Let's start there. The GOAT is out. GOAT out for real this time. And it makes sense that it would be for real this time. I was having trouble figuring out, other than from a PR standpoint, teams wanting to sign him, how this could all work out well for him if he was going to leave Tampa Bay. I mean, if he's going to leave that NFC South, which is for the taking, right? I mean, probably had the best Super Bowl chances just staying with Tampa Bay and figuring out some way of using, duct tape and glue and whatever you can find to put things back together in Tampa Bay, push out cap hits into the future, restructure a bunch, and then take another shot with the NFC getting weaker, especially weaker if Aaron Rodgers decides to, take off and go to the AFC. So I think that would have been his best chance, honestly. So moving to Las Vegas or San Francisco would have been probably the best option for him. But again, San Francisco, like, why would they want to pay a bunch of money if they have Brock Purdy, who's been okay, major surgery coming, but has been okay on a 7th round contract, and you have 3 first-round picks invested in Trey Lance? It would have given us a really good idea of Shanahan's level of confidence in Lance, which I think has been questionable at best right now, knowing that he's fully healthy. You've invested 3 first-round picks in him, and you would have brought in Tom Brady, which would have blown through the 3rd year of Lance's rookie contract. That would have been a big sign. That would have been a big sign there. But they say they are not keeping Jimmy Garoppolo, so he is gone. If you watch the QB GOAT series I had not watched, well, I guess you could have watched on YouTube, watched or listened to the QB GOAT series that I had. I had a series, and again, I'm going to reprise this later on this year. I had a series looking at all the different quarterbacks in NFL history in the modern era, which by modern era, I'm going back pretty far. I'm talking about in the mid 40s is when the game resembled what we see today in terms of the rules and everything else. Looked at all the different quarterbacks there, tried to figure out how much value they were producing above a below average quarterback. So not like replacement level, not average, but value above slightly below average. And adjust it for how much volume they have, make adjustments for the peak play that they have over a 3-year period, getting extra weight. A peak player, Steve Young being the biggest one of having like a really, really, really strong peak, but then only having 8 real seasons of play to go with for his career. And then also looking at the playoffs and how much they've added there. So Brady came out as being a number 1 in the end there, spoiler alert. But it was pretty close with Peyton Manning, which a lot of people would think, they don't like to hear it. I get it somewhat why people don't like to hear it. I think Brady is definitely done enough, especially with having the last Super Bowl in Tampa Bay and 2 seasons in Tampa Bay, especially last season where it was, almost MVP type of quality and pretty much was MVP quality that you're seeing from what he put up in those last couple of seasons. That was enough to really get over the hump. But if you look at them, if you compare Manning and Brady, and I talked a lot about this in the series, it is pretty interesting how we have maybe a little bit of historical revisionism, you could say, in how we look at the first half of Brady's career, which coincided with, the first 2/3 of Manning's career, let's say. So essentially from, the 2000s versus the 2010 sort of era. I mean, it's shocking to me that Brady was named the all-decade quarterback of the 2000s when he won 3 Super Bowls, when he was basically kind of like an average sort of quarterback. He got better after that. He had one really outstanding year, MVP year in 2007. He had the injury after that, came back, had a pretty good year in 2009. But, Manning was just piling up top 1, 2, or 3 efficiency seasons, multiple MVP seasons, got his Super Bowl in that decade too, his first Super Bowl, when he still had a live arm, and it wasn't it wasn't that last Super Bowl that he got where he wasn't playing well. I mean, it was kind of like a no-brainer that Manning should have been the quarterback of the decade there. And but Brady was actually got the first team there for the decade. So if you put the peak together, where Manning probably has the best or second best peak in NFL history, together with a fairly substantial career that did trail off when his neck fell apart. But Manning, midway through 2014, he was playing at an MVP level. And then something in the middle of the 2014 season is when he cliff dived, because he just went from MVP in 2013, breaking all those records, MVP level the first half of 2014, below average the second half of 2014, and then basically just going through the motions in 2015 and collecting Von Miller delivered championship ring in that season. But Brady, what he's done these last few years has really just pushed him over the top. And he had a decline this year. There's been a lot of talk about him not being afraid of contact and those sorts of things. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that sort of stuff. I don't know why a 45-year-old quarterback would suddenly decide that he's scared of contact. I think it was more, he just can really, the pocket movement was compromised enough, and maybe the recovery was compromised enough that he just having some issues. I mean, at a certain point, when you reach that age, we're talking about issues with muscle mass, bone mass, other things that you're able to even keep on your body, in addition to having the fast twitch type of fibers to make some of those pocket movements that probably made it difficult for him. So I didn't really see a huge rebound for him next year. So it's probably good that he's gone away here. It's unfortunate that it's part of the story from last season, what happened, which now transfers forward to this season. But of course, Brady will get his retrospectives and everything else. He's already has the Man in the Arena retrospective that we'll all find out about there. Quickly on Aaron Rodgers. I mentioned this thing about Aaron Rodgers. I'm still in believe it when I see it mode. I know the Raiders are being talked about a lot. It sounds like Rodgers ruled out the possibility of the San Francisco 49ers, who I don't believe would want to pay that much money anyway, necessarily, when they have Lance and Purdy there. Maybe there are other places, but Rodgers kind of fits into the same boat that I was talking about with Brady. It's like, why would you want to come over to the AFC, to the AFC West, to be in the same division? I know Russell Wilson's name doesn't quite mean what he used to, but still in the same division of Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert, and Patrick Mahomes, with a team that's defense stinks. I don't know. I mean, I had the Packers as being borderline top 10 team by the end of the season once things started to come together. his chances of winning a Super Bowl are infinitely higher, not infinitely higher, are significantly higher staying with the Packers, I believe, than moving to another team, even though he'd have a much lower cap hit. I mean, you're going to have to rework things for the Packers. You're going to have to restructure his deal. You're going to have to pull the Drew Brees move where you're just hoping, he retires and then everything falls apart when that ends up happening. But I don't know. I'm not a Jordan Love believer. So I'm still believe it when I see it camp as far as that is concerned. All right, let's talk coaching hires. Sean Payton, you can check out my article that the fact that he would be a steal for a first round pick. I still believe that. I think this is the ideal situation for the Broncos. I know there was talk that D'Amico Ryans was their number one guy. There was an NFL insider slap fight going on between Schefter and Rappaport about whether or not the Broncos were attempting to woo D'Amico Ryans until the last minute. And then I've seen some stuff out there as if that is true, and I don't know, I probably lean Schefter most of the time, but you never know on these situations. It did sound a little PR-ish, his take on that. Even if that is true, I don't think it really means it's bad process in any sort of way for the Broncos. I mean, you have one option, which is your option A. And if that was D'Amico Ryans, you pursued it until it couldn't be pursued. And then your option B would be Sean Payton. And it's a very different option. It's a, trade compensation you're going to have to give up. It's a ton of money you're going to have to pay him. It's a coach who had 15 years of head coaching experience versus one in D'Amico Ryans who has 2 years of coordinator experience. Basically, I'm trying to think, he only has like 3 or 4 years of real coaching experience, D'Amico Ryans. So they're definitely on the opposite ends of the spectrum in that regard. So maybe that would hint at some issues with process, but I think Peyton's the main guy. I mean, if we take trade compensation out of the equation, and this analysis that I did, it looked at research by Andrew Healy, the Browns VP of strategy. Now, the Browns did not hire a previous coach, but his research did show that most of the signal when it comes to performance, to past performance, either as a coordinator or as head coach, to future performance as a head coach, there's basically no indication, no signal in your performance as a coordinator, but there was about 70% of your value translated over when you looked at how teams performed above expectation versus what they had done on a trailing 3-year basis for every year. And, Peyton did that. Peyton did that with Brees. He did that without Brees, not quite as well. But he still did that without Brees, and he was able to piece together a strong running game with a very low ADOT for some limited quarterbacks after Brees left. And that long track record, combined with the fact that there is signal here that he wasn't fired, right? And the other coaches that we've seen who have been traded in the past, Gruden kind of fell into a great situation with the Bucs, but talking about multiple first-round picks for him in that situation. We're talking about Bill Parcells. No, was it Bill Parcells? Well, definitely Bill Belichick as someone who's come before. Parcells is definitely someone who has quit. I don't know if he was still under contract or not, and then been successful in multiple locations, going to even having success, not a lot of playoff success, but having success with the Dallas Cowboys, continuing to be able to do that later in his career. So there is a track record of those guys who are not fired, being able to have success going forward. So that's why I would have put Peyton as being the number one guy, in addition to the fact that I think Russell Wilson has a decent chance. And we've seen a lot of quarterbacks bounce back who are strong Hall of Fame type quarterbacks bounce back in their 30s when they have a down season. So I think that was it's a home run hire there, I think, for them. They don't care about the money, the draft pick. I mean, it's not ideal, but whatever. All your chips are in on Russell Wilson right now. And from Peyton's perspective, I think it's kind of a low risk deal for him, honestly. If you look at what happens this season, and this is something that I discussed as part of a Russell Wilson piece, saying there was no reason for him to be cut now, like some people have been talking about. The Broncos basically have a free roll on him for this season because his salary was going to be fully guaranteed either way. They could cut him next offseason. So Think about it from Payton's perspective and the range of outcomes here. The top range of outcome, of course, is that Russell Wilson is fixed in some sort of way. Maybe he doesn't put up MVP adjacent numbers, but he puts up good numbers. The defense is a strong defense. It was, let me see, according to my numbers, where they came out. I think if they faded a bit there, but they were very strong earlier in the season. They were like well within the top 5. They finished the season for me. Actually, you know what? They finished the season about 12th or 13th. So not quite as, they definitely fell off a lot later on in the season, but still below average for sure type of defense there. They have weapons. Offensive line's okay, not great. But Russ has been productive without a good offensive line in the past. Maybe you could say he was more mobile at that point, but we'll see. So things go well. Russ looks good. Sean Payton is king of the world. He's the fixer. He's worth every draft pick and every penny of the 20 plus million they're probably paying him a year to take this job. And he adds to his resume and puts him in there. People be saying, do we need to talk about Sean Payton maybe being the greatest coach of all time? Trust me, you'll hear takes like that if that ends up happening. If Russ muddles through and the team muddles through, that's probably the most complicated situation, because then the Broncos have to decide, do we keep this guy on, which will then trigger a rolling guarantee more into the future, hold him for one more season, maybe muddle through again. Sean Payton has to muddle through again, potentially. It'd get a little bit weird. The second best scenario may be Russ completely failing. Because if Russ completely fails, I don't think people are going to say it's Sean Payton's fault. It'd be very, very hard for him to be worse than what he was this last year. And the Broncos, despite putting so much into Russell Wilson, can wipe their hands clean with Russ, can trade off pieces that they may have, can rebuild, and Sean Payton will be allowed, at the minimum, to see through that rebuild. Now, it could be ugly for a year or two. We could be talking about, in that scenario, it being year 4 of Sean Payton in Denver before he has a real chance to compete for something. But he should be able to maintain his job. He should be able to, collect checks for about $20-something million a year. And, he can hobnob with the Waltons and that ownership group, which includes some of the biggest mover and shakers out there. Also, relationship between this ownership group and the Kroenke ownership group, one of the most powerful ownership groups that also owns, a bunch of stuff. Like Kroenke owns the Rams, owns the Nuggets, owns the Avalanche in Colorado, owns Arsenal, which is one of the top Premier League squads out there. He'll be in that club. He'll be in that club. That's a good place to be too. And he'll have a chance to prove himself again with a new quarterback and a new layer of offensive talent. And they do have a decent amount of talent where I think if they fire Saleh, they could probably expedite a rebuild if that ends up happening. If Russ ends up failing. So I think he's kind of covered on both ends there. Talking to DeMeco Ryans, I knew that he had a fairly substantial playing career, about 10 years between the Texans and the Eagles as a linebacker for them. He really does not have much of a coaching history. Again, this is offset somewhat by the fact that he has this long playing career, but this is it as a coach. So his final season in the Eagles was 2015. 2016, at least the resume I'm looking at is empty, but he comes to the 49ers, so he doesn't have a lot, he hasn't been a lot of different places. He hasn't seen a whole lot from a lot of different places either. As a coach, as a player, he had a little bit more experience there. So 2017, 49ers, defensive quality control coach. Quality QC is like, it's not like a real coach. Or it's not a positional group coach, right? So QC on the defensive side, 2017. 2018 through 2020, so a 3-year stretch there. Inside linebackers coach. Then 2 years as defensive coordinator, of course, taking over when Robert Saleh left. Saleh had a top defense. He had a top defense, a lot of talent on that defense. And then now he's going to move forward and be with the Texans. I have nothing against DeMeco Ryans. He seems like a very charismatic dude. He ran a top-notch unit for the 49ers. So I have nothing against Ryans. I just know the evidence points us to say that those things don't matter, or we don't know if they matter, or there's been no relationship between how good your defense has performed or your offense has performed if you're one of those types of coaches and how good you are as a head coach. It's just a different job. Maybe he'll call plays, maybe he'll be a defensive guy, but we saw with someone like Vic Fangio, who, people are stabbing their family members in the back probably to get Fangio on the side, not on the sideline, up in the box, coordinating the defense right now. It doesn't always go well as a head coach. It's a whole different thing. So we just don't know when it comes to Ryans. And I think it's also complicated at least a little bit by the lack of coaching experience that he has here. And by the fact that, Robert Saleh has been fine in New York. But this whole idea of you just hire the coach who is running the best defensive or offensive unit, I don't know. You never know how that's going to end up working out in the past. And even guys like Brandon Staley, who barely had a lot of coaching experience, Sean McVay didn't have a ton of coaching experience. They still had a lot in comparison to DeMeco Ryans because they weren't players for 10 years. So even though they're young, they're able to, accumulate, at least going different places, seeing different coaching styles from that side of things, where Ryan's just in the 49ers and just really being an inside linebacker and defensive coordinator for the last 5 years. Will be interesting to see how he goes. I do think they're going to get their quarterback, and they're probably going to get a wide receiver or someone else in that with multiple first-round picks. That's going to help them a lot. I think it might be the most attractive job in that manner with having cap space and everything else there. Ownership is what ownership is. If you have talented players and you got a good coach, you can bring a lot of stability, even if the ownership hasn't been necessarily the most stable place. I'm trying to think of other coaches who really have this type of playing history at the same sort of way as DeMeco Ryans. I don't know. I guess Dan Campbell played for a number of years. DeMeco Ryans was a much better linebacker than Campbell tight end, but that's someone who was out there. I don't know. Is there anyone else a head coach who really had that sort of thing? I guess, Jim Harbaugh didn't end up coming back, but Harbaugh obviously had a pretty long career and he was successful with the 49ers when he came in. So that's something there. Mike Vrabel. Oh, Vrabel's actually probably the closest guy that we're talking about and been successful there. So there's nothing against guys having a short track record and then becoming a good head coach, but we don't know that's necessarily going to be the case for DeMeco Ryans. Coordinators really quick. Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio. It sounds like Fangio's going to the Dolphins. The fact that he's had this sort of success in multiple places, I think, is one of the few coordinators we can say we're really excited about. Kellen Moore, I don't know. We'll see with Kellen Moore. I think all the Lombardi haters will just, find replace all of their tweets where they were saying something disparaging about Joe Lombardi and then just put Kellen Moore in there, since they were already doing so when it came to a lot of Dak stuff. Okay, free agency quarterbacks real fast before I get to the questions. So for free agency quarterbacks, I wrote this thing about Lamar Jackson today, and I don't know. I'm not as high on this idea that some people have that he can, play out the tags or bet on himself. The guy missed 10 games the last 2 seasons. We've seen a stark decline for the only real example of a rushing dominant quarterback in Cam Newton, although it came, later in his career. Jackson will only be 26 next year. Came later in his career, but still, it happened. And I think that the Ravens may not be as strong as some people think. This will be the first season in 11 years they don't have a comp pick. They only have 5 draft picks, and normally they're a team that has double-digit draft picks year in and year out. And it's not that they just don't have the draft picks, is what does that reflect? Well, that reflects the fact that they're net buyers in free agency last year. They'll be net buyers in free agency this year. And they were buyers on the trade market with substantial capital given up for Roquan Smith. And a substantial contract given up to him. Not a free agency type of contract after already having that sunk cost into Roquan Smith. It's just a different world now from the Ravens we've seen in the past, who haven't been the best drafters, but they just had so many more darts they could throw during the draft process. Now they have fewer darts they can throw. Now they don't have all those comp picks. Now they don't have a pipeline of young talent coming forward, who they were picking and choosing who they're going to let go, and then bringing back players on the cheap who were being cut elsewhere to not affect the comp pick formula, or bringing in players for, late day 3 type trade compensation, not this Roquan Smith deal. They're having to go and get elite talent by paying up for it, which in the long term is going to come back to bite them unless they just go on a heater like the Saints did in 2017 or something. Just go on a heater drafting players and hitting over and over and over and over again. Because they don't have a pick until the 3rd round this year. So for that reason, when it comes to Jackson, if you decide you're going to play out the tags, where are you going to be in 2 years? You're going to have taken 2 more years of hits. You're going to be richer. I mean, you have a couple of tags, so you'll have, $90 million in your pocket. So that's not bad. You won't be able to be tagged again for the rest of your career. So that's good. But you're going to have taken hits for 2 years. You're going to have an organization which may be in rebuild at that point in time. There's a definite possibility that that's going to be the case. And you might find a market where if you don't have a good season over the next 2 years, people are really going to be able to point back and say, MVP season in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, it hasn't been that great. It's been okay. I think there are reasons for why it hasn't been great because of the lack of talent and supporting cast around him. But at the same time, you look at Jackson, you could say he was in the top 10-ish for 2020 by the type of efficiency he was bringing there. He was still kind of there in 2020. 2021, it's getting a little tougher. It's getting a little tougher for him. By my numbers, he'd be more average-ish. Even by my adjusted numbers, more average-ish. And then this season, by the adjusted numbers, he looks okay. He looks like he's kind of like top, maybe 10th or 11th. 9, 10, 11, right in that sort of category. That's fine. But again, it's starting to get further and further removed from the MVP season. And again, he plays out 2 tags. He'll be 28 years old. I just don't know what the market will necessarily be for him at that point in time. So I think it's a mistake to say, let's push this. Let's bet on ourselves. Let's go through multiple tags if we need to here. I don't know. I'd be more amenable to getting the right contract, having the guaranteed, rolling guarantees. He's not going to get a fully guaranteed deal. The rolling guarantees structured properly for him so that he protects himself down in the future, even through a potential rebuild in a couple of years. And locking all that in at this point. When it comes to the fully guaranteed thing, it's weird. And I probably should have talked about this more when Hermsmeyer mentioned he believes that, all NFL contracts should be fully guaranteed. It's like, well, what are we protecting against exactly with these fully guaranteed contracts? I mean, the NBA does not have any provision where players have to get fully guaranteed contracts. The only thing that's easier for players to get fully guaranteed contracts in the NBA versus the NFL structurally is the fact in the NFL, you have to set aside all that guaranteed money in escrow. So you have a $250 million guaranteed contract for a quarterback. You got to put, you pay him out the signing bonus, and then you put the rest, sitting there. So you got to have that cash on hand to do so, or you got to borrow it and, be paying millions of dollars in interest in order to do that. or, lever your team up a little bit there, which some owners will not necessarily want to do. Um, but there's nothing about NFL contracts to say you can't do that. And if you say, I understand from an injury side, now normally players have pretty substantial injury guarantees that go beyond the full guarantees. The injury guarantees do not have to be escrowed. So, yeah, you can get a lot more injury guarantees if injuries are really what you're concerned about. I mean, how often are players really, though, non RG3 type of players really going down and then ending their career via injury? I mean, even he didn't really end his career via injury. I mean, he still eventually was able to come back and play. He might have been compromised, but he's still able to eventually come back and play. What the full guarantee protects against really is your play going down. You know, is a decline in your play, decline in how good you are, decline in how much value you're bringing. That's what it's protecting against. NFL players, like it or not, have very short windows outside of quarterback for for the period of time you can be confident that they will be good. You look at all these free agents that come over there. It's really, and the numbers have been run by Jason Fitzgerald on this one. It's really one season you can count on them being good. Reasonably confident they'll be good. One season on their new deal. By season 2, you have almost half of them falling off, is not performing on the level that you would hope for. By season 3, we're starting to get to a little bit of not outlier territory, but that unique group of elite non-quarterback players who can provide value, into their 30s and beyond. Well, not beyond, but into their 30s. It's rare to even get 3 good years. So if all deals were fully guaranteed in the NFL, knowing that it's a performance issue that goes down, not like they get injured and they can't go out there. I mean, sure, it's grinding on their bodies, all that. Don't get me wrong. But knowing that's the case, it's really a protection against performance. Teams just aren't going to sign players to more than a year on these fully guaranteed deals, or maybe 2 years for elite players, knowing that it's unlikely they're going to be useful or useful at that type of money 3 years down the road. Like, something will have to be given up. You don't just say you make everything guaranteed and everyone's current contract would be the same except for it would be guaranteed. No, like, teams would protect themselves. These glorified 2-year contracts that we have, which are listed as 5-year contracts, well, then they just become 2-year contracts instead of 5-year contracts that are really glorified 2-year contracts. And you'd also have this weird situation where, it's a salary cap league. The amount that you're able to spend is fixed per team. You can move it up and down, you can carry some forward, but there are minimum spending thresholds. So what you're doing by adding these more guarantees, if you wanted to add more guarantees, let's say you're just throwing these guarantees on the existing type of 3, 4, 5-year deals that we're doing here, all you're going to have is a whole bunch of players who are not providing value, eating up cap, and that cap is not going to be going to another player. It's not going to be going to the productive player. It's going to torpedo some of these teams who would just be stuck with unproductive players taking up the cap here. And a team where they need to build rosters of 50 plus players. Yeah, I don't get the fixation on the guarantees. It's not the same game as the NBA. Even NBA teams can get sunk by these guaranteed contracts. They have to end up trading away picks along with players all the time to get out from under them. And they only have, 12-man rosters and really 8 or 9-man rotations that end up being meaningful in this, and their careers last a lot longer. And they have bigger effects for the one individual player than players do, especially non-quarterbacks in the NFL. So all that combined, again, I just don't get the fixation on guarantees. Figure out how to structure your contract with rolling guarantees, with protections, and then also kind of like what Dak Prescott did here. He was really brilliant about this, or his agent was brilliant about this, is his number is going to jump up to 50 million this year. They can't cut him the way the contract is structured. Guess what they're going to have to do? They're going to have to restructure him. And when they restructure him or extend him, so if they're extending him, you are now at the bargaining table dictating to the team for an extension. If it's a restructure, which is more of an automatic sort of thing, still, that's just cash that flows immediately to you. You're getting that more cash up front, which will then be amortized over the life of the contract, the rest of the life of the contract. And it makes it harder for them to cut you in the future because you have dead money that's being pushed off into the future rather than having current cap hit. So Dak Prescott's going to be protected for even more years now on his contract because they're going to have to restructure him in this $50 million deal. You don't want to do like the Derek Carr thing where you give your team a break. You have a low cap hit. You give them an out after 1 year when your cap hit jumps up and then they cut you. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. Structure it so they can't cut you. They can't cut you while that huge jump happens. The first huge jump happens. Then you are in control. You are getting those guarantees extended out. I mean, you might be compromising your team's ability to win in the future, but hey, let's talk pocketbooks here. Let's not talk about winning. When we're talking about what these players deserve and what they end up getting. All right, done enough rambling here when it comes to the things of the week and reviewing my articles and all that stuff. Let's get to your questions. First, going to the comments on that were from paid subscribers on the post this week. We got a handful of questions here. Let's start with, I think these are in order that they were submitted, but let's see here. This is from Jeff S. He actually writes Jeff's newsletter. Check out Jeff's newsletter on Substack. Do you think the NFL is in a good spot in terms of how valuable elite quarterbacks and rookie contract quarterbacks are? I've heard that main PFF pod, Sam and Steve, once again, getting into the discourse, talk about how if you don't have either a top 8 quarterback or rookie contract, you are pretty much screwed. If the tier of Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, Derek Carr, etc., really have no chance of winning a Super Bowl, is this a good thing for the long-term health of the league? It feels like eventually the league will get into a spot where these guys are thrown away for less talented rookie long shots on the promise of hitting the jackpot, resulting in 20 to 24 teams having bad QBs. Maybe I'm being overreactionary, but it feels like the league should find a way to make this tier of quarterbacks a tad more likely to win a Super Bowl to keep them in the league. I mean, I don't know how the league is figuring this out, Jeff. I think teams maybe need to have a little bit more putting their foot down when it comes to not giving up big contracts to mid-ish tier sort of quarterbacks. At the same time, I think it's overstated how you either have to have the elite quarterback or the rookie contract quarterback. I think that philosophy fluctuates a lot depending upon how the drafting cycles have gone. We had some dark days in the NFL draft going from about 2013, I guess, because that's after Russ and Andrew Luck came in 2012. So 2013 through 2016. And yeah, 2016. It wasn't great. You know, I think 2016 maybe was pointed out as a year like Carson Wentz success, Jared Goff's success on the rookie deal. So maybe not 2016. Okay, let's say 2013 through 2015. Not great. Now, we just had a good run of top-notch quarterbacks. Like if you're going to say the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now that you would want to have for the next 5 years, who are they? Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, probably would be my top 4. Trevor Lawrence, maybe you throw in there. And maybe Lamar Jackson. I don't know. You throw Lamar Jackson in there too. All the guys, at least as of now, I know Jackson is done with his 5th-year option at this point. But all those guys are either still in the rookie deals for guys like Herbert and Burrow and whatnot, or for Mahomes had his first big cap step up this season. And they didn't restructure it. They did a good job. Let's see. What was Mahomes here? Because Mahomes had his first. They'll eventually restructure him. Don't get me wrong, but people were probably telling them they should restructure, at least think about restructuring this year when it jumped up to 35 million from 7.4 million last year. They really kept that cap number down the first two seasons. 5.4, 7.4, now 37.8 this year. Oh, no, sorry, 35.8. So they wrote it. They took it. They didn't restructure it. Good job there by the Chiefs. But Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes, man. Like, you can bring in Juju and MVS and whoever else, and, have Kelsey still hanging around. You got a nice little tight end discount there that you're getting there and still have this great offense. I mean, it's not even top 8 quarterback. We're talking about top 1 quarterback, right? For that type of performance that you're getting on that type of deal. Now, his number jumps up to 46.8 next year. So what is that? $11 million? They could probably still ride that too. Eventually, it's going to jump up to like 60, and they're going to have to do something. But they could probably still roll. They could probably still roll with Mahomes on that deal next year, and let's see what they do. Now, even for Josh Allen, who you could argue is like the second best quarterback in the NFL, you want to say it's Burrow. I'm still leaning Allen. But like, his cap hit was 10 million and 16 million the last 2 years. Next year, it jumps up to 39.8 million. Next year, we're talking about a 23 million and change jump to Josh Allen's cap hit. So they haven't even had to deal with any consequences of the contract yet. You can't just point to Allen and say, well, he's good enough to overcome those sorts of things. He's not even really on that sort of deal. So what I would say is I think it's a little bit overhyped. You either need the top guy or the rookie deal. What you've had now is you've had top guys and rookie deals. I mean, Josh Allen, again, 16.4 million this last year he was making. Not his rookie deal, technically the second year of his extension, but not any worse than being on a 5th-year option or something like that. It's better than being on a 5th-year option for a quarterback. So they haven't even had to deal with it yet. It's really more important how you're building around these guys. And the Chiefs restocking by trading Tyreek Hill, that's going to help a lot, even though they, famously blew that first-round pick on CEH. Being smart around them. That's what's really going to make the biggest difference. And there's too much of a focus on you need the rookie or the top 8 quarterback. There should be more focus on you need to be making the right series of moves around them, building around them. And no matter what, don't give away a huge contract that you can't get out of eventually to a guy that you're not confident in. That's a problem. Reinvest at the position by continuing to draft to give yourself potentially optionality when things happen there. And don't ever think we're like all in and we're going to give this quarterback this huge contract, but we're going to lower the cap hits these first 2 years. So then let's make a whole bunch of other bad moves to bring in talent for this push over the next 2 years. Windows are longer. Even for these types of quarterbacks, you have to think about windows in a longer term. I mean, the Chiefs traded away Tyreek Hill. They're in the Super Bowl. You don't always have to be going all in every season. Bills really probably went too all in this last year. They're going to feel some of the effects of that going forward. Okay, let's get to the next question. From Samuel here. Oh, Samuel. He has the little indicator that he is a founding member subscriber. Thank you, sir. Looking at the Super Bowl teams, what do you think are some key takeaways for the Chiefs and Eagles over the last few years? Could be individual moves, but also the overall approach. Team building is probably the easiest to analyze, but also includes coaching staff, scheme, game management, etc. Obviously, Mahomes is hard to replicate, but that also wasn't a sure thing. Yeah, I mean, I talked about this a little bit with Mahomes. I think the big thing with the Chiefs is, and whether they were forced into this with Tyreek Hill or not, but being willing to trade Tyreek Hill. The hardest thing teams have to do is being willing to let players go when either to free agency, when they just don't justify the contract that you're going to have to pay them to extend them, and someone else will give them more, and you get a comp pick back, or in trades. like you're doing here with Tyreek Hill. It's almost like the odds are so much in your favor if you have a team that you're already multiple years into a successful run. You don't have a ton of cap space, just sitting around all over the place. The odds are almost always in your favor that you're going to benefit from trading a non-quarterback elite type of player. Hill is close. Tyreek Hill is close to being so elite that it's tough, but even he's going to be into his 30s soon enough, and we'll end up seeing what happens. So that's what I would say for the Chiefs, the big takeaway there. Where the prior year, after losing to the Bucks, they actually made some bad moves, I would think, going all-in-ish, bringing in why is his name escaping me now? The tackle that they brought in from the Ravens, but bringing him in, paying a ton of money for across the entire offensive line, all that sort of stuff they did. Obviously the CEH draft pick a couple years before, they made their mistakes, and luckily having Mahomes allows you to dig out of it. But finally turning the corner on letting someone go, reaping the benefits via cap and draft pick was big for them. For the Eagles, I mean, we're going back to the Jalen Hurts pick, right? That's why I initially called it a great pick, was giving yourself optionality, always looking at the bigger picture, not doing things based upon what a rabid media environment also, and fans who are all lamenting the pick, what they have to say. Thinking more about it logically. I think that's been big. Bringing in Sirianni, again, you never know how good these guys are going to be beforehand, but if you can bring in a young coach who looks like he's willing to implement things, it looks like he's been very good game management-wise and other things. He's willing to work hand in hand with the big research department that they've brought in. Hey, that's a big move. That's a good move. And I also think ownership, and when it comes to Jeff Lurie and his ability to stick with Howie Roseman, but also if he's had kind of a data evidence-informed approach even before Roseman was there. But Roseman's been around a long time. If I think for a lot of other owners, with the ups and downs they've had, Roseman could have, got his walking papers multiple times, but that didn't happen with Lurie. So I think that would be another big thing to point out when it comes to the Eagles, is the importance of ownership there. All right, next question. Let me take a little sip of my beverage here. Next question from Max. Not a founding member. Come on, Max. Step up, buddy. How many years behind MLB, NBA do you believe the NFL is from an analytical perspective? I think most, if not all, of the low-hanging fruit in both sports has been scooped up, and the least analytically inclined team today would have been the sharpest a decade ago. How long until all 32 teams understand they should trust fourth down bots, throw more on early downs, invest in premium positions, and the common talking points eventually have to start changing? I wrote that article about the age of the analytical GM being now. Josh Hermsmeyer, who was my guest last week, disagreed with that. He kind of thought the Eagles were a standalone entity as far as understanding those things. It's going to be really interesting what happens in the next year or two, because I do think bringing in these younger GMs who are willing to look at these things, maybe a little bit more openness, who aren't, the Dave Gettleman, like I won a Super Bowl 10 years ago doing it some other way. Great. We're in a new era now. That's probably going to help some. Rand Carthon, who came in for the Titans, who was, had some very good things to say about the use of analytics. He said that ownership asked him about it in the interview. So ownership becoming a little bit wiser to it. The Eagles' success this year. Now, the Eagles' success in 2017 was important to start to accelerate some of it. But I think this year it's going to be even more important, because now we're talking about more of a holistic approach, not just an in-game management approach that people are going to have to look at for what the Eagles are doing. And the fact that they have this very robust research department, a bunch of people there, big data bowl for the NFL that Mike Lopez and the NFL puts on every year. We're going to talk about, I think it's going to probably be double-digit people hired out of that competition this year to either NFL franchises or their vendors or others who are using that type of analysis and selling that type of insight to NFL teams. I think it's going to start to accelerate here. It's going to become table stakes. As you mentioned, it is in the MLB and the NBA now. How long is it going to take? Well, it's always going to be a little bit longer because of the small samples, because of the difficulty in being able to figure out the player interactions and things like that. But I think we're going to get there sooner and sooner. A lot of people who are just not even open to considering it are going to age out, and we're going to get more of like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, the Madden playing generation of GM and coaches and others who understand if you press your edges, over a large enough sample, it does work and win. And you have to be able to risk something not going your way in order to do so. All right, Colin W. What is your preferred mix of game management versus letter of the law when it comes to officiating? Do you want to see a role for analytics in optimizing officiating? The Bengals-Chiefs game, plus a topic on Wharton Moneyball where they discuss the intersection of modeling and values, sparked this question. Note, by game management, I'm thinking things like entertainment value, e.g., game length, game flow, reduced blowout probability, and makeup calls. By the letter of the law, I'm thinking calling everything as you see, regardless of game situation or past missed calls, potentially even from a panel of refs watching the all 22. If these are dumb definitions, feel free to redefine. Not dumb at all, Colin. And I think we do have the aforementioned Mike Lopez at the NFL. He worked on it. And I think he also worked on a proposal when it came to being able to review DPIs. I might be incorrect on this, but I think is basically he pointed out, and we had a very, indelible image in people's minds from the Saints-Rams game and the missed DPI call there. He had this idea of making everything more reviewable. And because of that happened. But we saw how it was rejected by the fans, maybe by the refs themselves, and how they were willing to call it. It's just very, very difficult in the NFL because of the stoppage of play and having tons and tons and tons of replays. It makes it pretty hard to do. I'm sure international soccer fans, what I've been watching a decent amount of recently, don't hate the VAR system, but they seem to roll with the punches a little bit better on that one than we even see happening here with the NFL, where you can have more concrete rules. So when they aren't being implemented the way you want, then it goes forward. I mean, what I would say is I think the NFL would benefit the most by actually having less transparency in some ways. Meaning we've started to see now how the Sky Judge, they're using that. And sometimes they're just overturning what they had on the field or making up or having the correct call what they had on the field because of what they're seeing on the Sky Judge. They don't really talk about it. They just say, actually the ruling on the field is not a catch for that or something to that effect. They do that sometimes now. We need more of that. Less breaks in the action, less time for everyone to mull it over, more just moving on to the next play. I'm down for that. Forget coaches' challenges. Take it out of their hands. Just have the refs make it up and go forward. I think that would work. I think it would be good because it gives people less time to dwell on it. I think the replays, people aren't going to go crazy for them as much. And I think it becomes more of an accepted flow of the game as opposed to this big thing that happens. So I think that's where I would say. Bring in the Sky Judge, bring in much quicker reviews, implement it much more quickly, take very short breaks when you implement it, and then go on to the next play as quickly as possible. I think that has better watchability. I think it gives less focus to those particular plays from when it's happening. Less opportunity for everyone to bitch about it on social media, which is my favorite thing, of course. All those sorts of things. That would be my suggestion. And maybe you eventually start to move back towards the feeling that we had before, where bad calls are kind of just part of the game. I know people have this nostalgic feeling of before replay happened. Well, we can kind of like thread the needle here of saying we have replay, but it kind of feels like we're not using it because we're just changing these calls in the moment. And we're not making explicit about whether or not it is something that's being called in and changed or not. Kind of thread the needle in that regard. And that's how I would play it out. All right, let's get to questions on the thread. If you have any questions, go ahead here. What's your brew? Yeah, I should go over that. I'm stealing Jason Fitzgerald's bit here where he's drinking, although I'm doing it at 2 p.m. and he's doing it at night. So, as they say, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. It is Sunrun Black Flag Brewing Company. It's all right. Hazy IPA. Where is it in? There's so many local breweries everywhere. So I'm in Rockville, Maryland, which is about 45 minutes outside of DC. This is from Columbia, Maryland. Lots of breweries here in Maryland. I don't know. The hazy IPAs are just so easy to drink. I go with the old, what they call the West Coast IPA, which is a little bit more bitter also. I like to go with that second, though. Like if I'm going to drink multiple different types of beer, I like to go with the hazy first, a little fruitier, and then bring in the more robust, stronger tasting West Coast IPA second. But that's the first time I've ever had it. So not bad. Not bad. You can't really go wrong with these hazy IPAs most of the time. All right. Any other questions here from Aaron on YouTube? Are you not concerned about Lamar's injuries the last 2 seasons regarding contract talk? Yeah, no, I am concerned. I mean, I mentioned it a few different times there. I don't think there's almost a tipping point when it comes to these injuries where it's like a player is considered to be injury prone or not injury prone. And you can go back and forth between those two things. Lamar does not seem to have entered, at least in the Ravens' mind, I don't think. And I don't even think in most fans' mind, injury prone yet. Which is kind of weird because he is a running quarterback. And there was the COVID stuff last year, though, as part of it. This year, there's a little bit of like, can he play? Can he not play? I don't know. The problem for Lamar is, again, if you don't get these guarantees in your contract, if you're not secure there, that injury prone versus non injury prone, I mean, even one more year of missing significant game time, 5, 6, 7, 10 games, all of a sudden we might be just talking about Lamar like he's injury prone and he'll never be able to play a whole season again, even though that'll be bupkis. That'll be like too far in that direction. That could happen. So I'm that's why I am concerned for him, honestly, and a little concerned from the teams too. But that's what I'm saying. For him now, get that long-term deal, get your money, keep going for this here. Will running quarterbacks become more fungible? I mean, I think that should have already happened. There was a very famous, well, not very famous, like niche post in this RotoViz website that I used to write for, which was like the smartest kind of data-based fantasy football analysis. The former proprietor of that, who had the name Fantasy Douche, believe it or not, well, that was his name on Twitter. He was anonymous, so he never revealed himself. He had this YOLO QB theory, which I liked a lot, which was drafting or signing multiple cheap running quarterbacks and then run that sort of offense. I kind of like combining that with also having a cheaper quarterback who can maybe function a little bit better if you're playing from behind or on a third down or something like that. But yeah, I think they should be. We saw this weird thing even with the Texans this year where they were platooning their quarterbacks there. And Jeff Driscoll was one of their quarterbacks, and he's like a stud athlete type of quarterback. I mean, he looks like Josh Allen as far as his metrics are concerned. Maybe more of that. We'll see. We'll see going forward. Mitchell Davis here. What if you have multiple cheap players at other high positions? I'm not sure what that's in reference to, but presumably it's about the quarterback stuff. Yeah. I mean, I think, again, that's the missing part of the argument here is don't mess up around the quarterback. Don't go all in around the quarterback. and you're going to have a lot less problems. Try to extend your windows, even if you don't have a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen or whoever. Like, it's just good management, period. It's weird how it's like copycat league. It's a copycat league. It's a copycat league. No one like follows what the Patriots basically did the entire time, where Belichick was unemotional, let players go, brought them back when they're cheap. Never thought, someone like a Chandler Jones, oh, we got to bring this guy back. I mean, they didn't even get that much for Jones. It was a second-round pick. But they didn't have to pay him, a ton of money, and they were able to figure things out and spend money on mid-price free agents, which are the only ones who are cut by their former team, or the only ones that kind of end up being a real value there. All right, I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in. If you're listening to this on the podcast, that means you're a paid subscriber, and I thank you so much for that. We'll have another interview next week. Can't decide if I'm going to talk props with Matt Freeman. I think so. And the week after that, I'm going to try to get Jason Fitzgerald on. He doesn't even know that yet, but I'm going to stalk him down and find him and force him to come on the podcast to talk about free agency going forward. Until then, everyone, have a great weekend. Enjoy a football-less weekend. Maybe watch some international soccer with me. Follow our Brighton Seagulls is the new team there for me. And I'll be talking to everyone next week. Thanks so much.